You bring up a good point right there with both candidates have kind of espoused the need for energy independence. I guess the big question is how would we go about defining that? And I think Al probably has a great answer for that.
Well, we've heard this phrase for quite a while now, not just during the campaign, and I really think it's misleading. When people in the United States talk about energy independence, what they really mean is reduction or elimination of importing of oil from specific regions of the world. If you carry that to its logical conclusions, no importing of oil at all. So it's not energy independence, it's oil sustain or self-sufficiency is really what is being discussed, because the U.S. has a great deal of energy resources in terms of oil and gas and coal and nuclear and solar and wind and geothermal and hydro. We are a major producer of energy. What we don't produce is the 20 million barrels of oil a day we use. We have to import 13 or 14 millions. So we're highly vulnerable on the oil side, which is quite different from energy independence. That to me is just a phrase that's a meaningless phrase in the global economy. Every country is dependent on every other country, but we are particularly over-dependent on oil. So when you follow that a little further, what is oil used for primarily? It's used for transportation. So if one is serious about reducing the need for importing oil, particularly from regions of the world we prefer not to, you have to be serious about transportation. Because oil is not used very much to produce electricity, hardly at all. That is done by coal, oil, hydro, and nuclear. So building nuclear power plants is going to do nothing to increase or decrease our dependence on oil, and building solar power plants is not going to decrease it either. And the emphasis on transportation is the critical thing for an energy policy. And what that means over the long term is reducing the fuel that's used in transportation, because the U.S. simply does not have oil in sufficient quantities. And that means transferring the fuel from oil to something else. Natural gas, electricity, and then you do get into the generating technologies or other forms of biofuels, etc. And I think that in looking at the two campaigns, from what I've read, the Democratic platform is more comprehensive in that it seems to recognize we do need to develop coal and oil, or at least coal and gas. There's not much oil to develop. We use 7 billion barrels a year in this country. So there's nothing like that available anywhere in the United States. And then from what I've read about their platform is they are not sort of avoiding either the traditional technologies, coal, gas, and nuclear power, but they see it as a transition to investing in a long-term sustainability program that would involve fuels that are less, impact the environment less, but also are indigenous. So that makes more sense in terms of energy independence.
Well, in terms of, you mentioned that for us to be serious about being quote-unquote energy independent, which seems to mean independent of oil from foreign countries, I know, let's say that it's the impossible dream to think that Americans will drive less, for example. So, Eric, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about we're going to build, we're going to do offshore drilling, or let's drill in Alaska, or these kinds of areas. I mean, what's the reality of that happening? And then also, you have to think about having to create this entire production system in order to make it feasible. So, I mean, in terms of oil drilling, what is really possible, and is it all just kind of a pie in the sky sort of a thing?
That's a good view of it. In a simple way of saying it, you could kind of imagine that if you viewed the fact that you could just go out and drill oil, pull it in, and sell it as that was such an easy thing to do, that's sort of like going out and getting free money, and why wouldn't we have already done that? The reality of actually going and doing drilling is that you drill something that you think you have found. So a larger way of saying is where can you find oil that actually can be recovered? And oftentimes it's in deeper waters where the technology didn't exist before. But finding oil to start with, putting the hundreds of millions of dollars that it takes up front for most of the time to find large fields, then the enormous financial risk that it really takes a very sophisticated company, for the most part, to put together the entire system to go actually do that. Mm-hmm. We take it for granted that, you can just go do it. It's because there's a whole bunch of people that are really good at what they do. Mm-hmm. To bring that on in terms of the processing capabilities, and then to have the first drop of oil come out the other end, we'll be looking for who is the president after the current presidents. So the real reality of what you can do in a very short amount of time, drilling for more oil is not a silver bullet for anybody. The idea of alternative energies, the whole thing has to be a system of how do you spend your money during a month? You don't just spend it on one thing. Mm-hmm. And an enormous aspect of drilling for oil is that in a lot of basins that have already been drilled, that would be called brown basins, like green and brown like grass, that a brown basin that's largely used up, as the price of gas and oil goes up, those basins can, the value of that oil that's there, like for us around here, Bakersfield region, mm-hmm. is it's been producing for a very long time, and a lot of that oil is now of significantly more value because the price is more. Mm-hmm. So it's very much driven by price. And so the thing that in many respects of looking at going and finding more oil, it's finding more oil at a particular price, mm-hmm. like finding gold. Mm-hmm. Gold at $32 an ounce, there is none to be found. Gold at $900 an ounce, there's a lot of it to be found.
So it's a basic process of economics in terms of just supply and demand. That's is what it sounds like.
And an enormous amount of expertise that has to be there for somebody to do this. Finding a whole bunch more oil, there's a limit to how much is there, mm-hmm. but it's also a significant time limit, and then even a larger limit is we have so constructed a lot of our laws in ways that the creative, how do you actually solve things that are a benefit to the environment, that are a mm-hmm. benefit to people, we often think very much more simplistically than really is a benefit to anybody. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that is things that, from my sort of point of view in some ways, would be that really neither party is going to amount to anything mm-hmm. in terms of the words they say. Mm-hmm. It's really, what are they actually going to do for real mm-hmm. in actually looking at how they solve a very, very complicated problem with the real ways that those things are done. And it's so simple, you could say I'm for this, but we really know that the laws going a particular way are functionally impossible for anybody to really overcome that. Mm-hmm. And so for a lot of this, I think this becomes something that the answers are dramatically more complicated. Mm-hmm. And maybe if the American public held our people to a higher standard of saying, actually propose something that you actually can really do. Mm-hmm. Neither one of them can actually do either one of the things that they're saying.
David, it looks like you have a comment.
Yeah, actually a question. I know that there's a federal government moratorium on drilling in the North Slope, mm-hmm. and Sarah Palin in her acceptance speech specifically mentioned that they would go after that, and JohnMcCain.com says the same thing. We're going to open up the North Slopes. I assume the moratorium is because of potential environmental impacts. Can you comment on that?
If you actually go back and look at the history of that, and I worked on the North Slope for a while, a lot of the kinds of ideas of why you put a moratorium on something of the strategic stockpiles is really to try to say, we have this knowing that in the future something is going to be worth a lot more than it's worth mm-hmm. right now.
So it's like piggy banking it, basically.
And for looking at that can answer a small piece of anything that's there. But I think, in a sense, both groups are creating straw men mm-hmm. that's saying, this will solve the problem. And yet, I think it's a reflection on us as the American public of why are we not more discerning mm-hmm. to ask them all to do things that are more realistically looking at where the worker bees, like us guys and the American public, how do you actually go do this?
Yeah.